Welcome to this new series, Tribalism and Resisting the System, a Universal Perspective. This is episode 1. Quick introduction. The concept I originally came up with, or the title of the concept, for a social networking page that I do. Which, I thought, oh, here's my chance. I can expound, a ton of knowledge and, literally decades worth of research. But, it basically devolved to 80% me sharing cool memes that, somewhat reflected the idea. Sharing a few videos, news stories, and maybe 5% original material of my own. So I decided to take it into a different direction and try a video series. The introduction to the series, I figure I'll do over the course of 3 episodes instead of trying to do it all in one. I apologize if it comes off a little clumsy here, the first couple. It's, speaking into, video camera isn't something I do all the time. But I thought I would start off with reading the, I guess you'd call it a mission statement that I came up with for that page. I've altered it slightly for those of you on the page. I haven't altered it in any way other than to make it work a little better in this format. Like, I don't refer to it as a page, so I reworded that a little bit, but the whole body of it is exactly the same. What I'm going to do for this episode 1 is read through the entire mission statement, and then I'm going to go back. I've got it broken down into 3 parts, and once I have it all read, I'm going to reread the first part and have a little discussion on it. And obviously you can see where the progression is going. Episode 2, we'll have a discussion on part 2, episode 3, and so on. And after that, the discussions, I'm going to keep them brief and basic, just because the more detailed version, will be episodes to come. I don't want to be sitting here and trying to cram an entire video series, into one episode and then have nothing to talk about. So, anyway. Tribalism and Resisting the System, a Universal Perspective. Part 1. This concept acknowledges all races and cultures. All races and cultures descend from tribal people. The word tribalism has in some circles been maligned as a source of racial supremacy. This is not the definition that serves our purposes here. The idea in this context being that tribalism is indeed universal. Tribalism as a lifestyle, meaning living in autonomous, small, organized groups of like-minded individuals in a self-sufficient and self-reliant way, as independent as possible from the machinations of modern civilization, also known as the system. This could be what is not necessarily separated by race and/or culture, as seen fit by each particular small organized group in question. Part 2. We all have the natural right to live how we want, with whom we want, as long as we do not harm others doing the same or encroach on their liberty to do the same. Independent community spirit being the whole point. organizing into small self-sustaining groups that live a simple way and tread lightly upon the earth and each other while shedding our dependency on the system and its institutions is how we win. Fighting each other and getting caught up in political distraction is how we lose. In the system, we are insignificant grains of sand on a vast beach. In small, autonomous tribal communities, each member is as important as the next and is like family. Would you rather be an easily replaceable gear in a giant machine that chews up people in the environment, or an irreplaceable member of your own tribe, which is your people? Part 3. I would encourage all interested in this concept to make acquiring usable land away from major population centers and learning the skills and gathering materials for a simple, self-sufficient life a top priority. These few paragraphs have only scratched the surface of the concept of tribalism as a means of resistance to the system. I would like to stress that all communities should first and foremost be warrior societies, as these are dangerous times we live in, and the defense and well-being of the tribe, its children and elders, and its autonomy is of the utmost importance. I hope as time goes on to unfold to whom it may interest a plan to restore the dignity and autonomy that the modern industrial system has and continues to rob from us through our dependence on its institutions and organizations. And now a little discussion on part 1. Now, I mean, first of all, a universal perspective. I think that's something a little misunderstood. And there's reasons for it. There's good reasons for it. But, you know, we really have to work. And this has to do with anything, not just this, but you really have to work from where you're at. But going back to the universal perspective, now you know that you know, I'm coming at this from at least loosely a Native American you know, line of thinking as far as the you know, the spiritual aspects going on in the background of a plan like this, and of actual culture, and because also the tribal people, the indigenous tribal people of the area where I am right at this moment, you know, were obviously Native Americans. And I believe that we should, if we're going to do this, it makes the most sense to find what the culture is or was of the land you were actually occupying, because their culture was the way it was exactly because of their relationship to the land and to the seasons, if that makes any sense. But back to the universal aspect. A lot of the perspective of a lot of people is that there's indigenous people and then there's white people, and you know, that's something that, if this is going to work, is literally going to turn off the majority population of at least the area I'm in, and that's going to be a problem right from the start. But a little background. European colonialism didn't start when they came over here or anywhere else. European colonialism started in Europe. Europe was made up of tribes. You know, they were known now in history as the barbarian tribes usually. Most of what you see in fictional stories is just that. To go back to probably the initial European colonialism, was Rome. And Rome attempted over the course of years and years to bring these barbarian tribes under their rule, and it didn't work. Militarily, these so-called primitive, compared to the Romans at the time, barbarian tribes, the Romans couldn't get anywhere with them militarily. It wasn't until Europe as a whole, started adopting Christianity that they were able to break them spiritually, by removing them from their spiritual practices, which were, of course, directly tied to the land. And by the time they were done, Europe is, how it is. A bunch of monarchies that were all cousins, and everybody else was their serfs and slaves. But just to show that it isn't really a case when you go back far enough in history of all the people of the world versus white people. We need white people, to get their heads right and decide that maybe we're making sense. And my ancestry being primarily from Europe, here I am. So, anyways, another aspect I'll discuss in this episode is tribe being family. And of course, obviously, if people are going to come together that aren't blood relations, they're not technically family. By family, I mean how you live together. How does a family that lives in the same household live together? You expand that to multiple families on a single piece of land. How do you live together? That should give you an idea of where I'm going with that. Of course, all these things, I'm just giving a basic overview. These are all things that'll be discussed at length, in other episodes later on. Small self-sufficient groups. Small. What do I mean by small? This is something I've read a lot about, and it varies a little. I would say, on average, people who have studied this, people who have studied hunter-gatherer tribes, people who study psychology and anthropology, always pretty much come to the conclusion that any group over 150 people, then you start having problems. Then you start getting hierarchies and authority, and that family structure just doesn't hold up. Pretty soon you need, like we're at now, you got to have committees for everything, and meetings and administrators and enforcers, and that's what we don't want. Some people say that's possible up to 300. I just had read recently somebody was talking about groups up to 500. I think the between 30 and 150 range is far more realistic, especially considering the lack of viable land to sustain bigger groups, with that sort of lifestyle. Self-sufficient, self-reliant, independent. What does that mean? That means that you aren't having to be dependent on outside institutions. Now, a lot of people, smoke in my eyes, a lot of people think because they're, let's say, economically independent. By economically, I mean they make money enough to live comfortably. Yeah, I mean, that's independent in one sense, you know, until the day you go to the grocery store and the lights are off and the doors are locked. You know, you're not independent. You're dependent on the system. By the system, you know, some people when you say the system, they think you mean, oh, you mean welfare, or you mean this, or you mean that. I mean all of it. All of industrial civilization is the system. Every aspect of it. Every aspect of it is completely designed to rob us of our independence. We have to be dependent and interdependent on institutions that are outside our control. So let's say, for our purposes here, independence means not being dependent on institutions outside of our own control, outside of our own sphere of influence, you might say. Dependent on what? I mean, what are the main basics to live? You know, food, water, shelter, you know, warmth. You know, you take care of all that. Defense. You take care of all that yourself. You get enough people on a piece of land, you could do that. People do. There's plenty of them out there. There's plenty of examples. You know, even before, like I mentioned, they used Christianity to break the barbarian tribes. You know, and also the Native American tribes here. Same exact. You know, they just took what they did there and they brought it here. It's said that early Christians lived exactly the way I'm describing. So Christianity, running up my notes, in and of itself is not going to exempt you from the tribal system. It being used as a mechanism, it being used as a mechanism. That's what I'm looking for. It being used as a mechanism of power and control. That's what, you know. That's what we don't want. If you want to have a self-sufficient group homesteading on a piece of land and practice Christianity, I don't have a problem with that, and nobody else should either. If you want to live in a tribal group on a piece of land where you completely reject Christianity, I don't have a problem with that either. The thing is you do that here and you do that over there, and you don't bother each other. You know, as long as nobody's bothering each other, what difference does it make? They're growing their own food and doing their own thing. You're growing their own food. Maybe you even trade back and forth. You know, you don't have to see eye to eye on everything to make this idea work. I mentioned separatism as not being the goal, but being a possibility. And what I just described with Christianity or not being Christian is exactly what I'm talking about. If you want to separate yourself, whether it be by racial lines, by cultural lines, by religious lines, spiritual lines, you know, anything you want, no one should have a problem with that, as long as you're doing it in the area you occupy and aren't forcing it on your neighbors or, you know, lynching people. If somebody wants to live only with other white people, I have no problem with that, as long as they're not bothering anybody else. If people want to live with all kinds of races of people because they just love to, you know, have racial diversity, I don't have a problem with that. Do I want it to be forced into one or the other? No. In a modern industrial, you know, civilization, that's exactly what it does. modern industrial civilization, as far as the psychological aspect of it, that's all it is taking round pegs and forcing them into square holes, or vice versa. That's what it is. It's a sorting mechanism, and if you aren't sorted to the top level, the big club, then you are pushed through that square hole, like it or not. Some people don't mind it. I never liked it. I'm a free human being, and that's how I'm going to live. And this is a plan that could make that happen, and it could make it happen for everyone. Like I mentioned, who wants to be some number on some institution's database? That's no way to live. The tribal family, and like I said, by family I'm not necessarily meaning blood relations, although tribal people back in the day were generally families and extended families, living together, and they still could be, but not necessarily, and not likely, because if how many people in your family, if you like this idea, are going to go along with it? They're just going to say, hey, that's a great idea, count me in. Not many. Not at least till they see it working. And they see you doing it, and they see all of a sudden you don't have the stress and anxiety of, living a modern Western industrial lifestyle. It might start looking pretty good. But anyways, I'm going to wrap this up before I go off beyond what I want to. So that was the original mission statement I wrote probably a couple years ago. It still applies. It applies more than ever. The further we go, the better it'll apply, because technologically, look where we're heading. Think you're a number in some database now. Wait. Because continuing the way we go, that's our future. And the whole idea is all these artificial intelligence programs basically automating everything, where when something you're trying to do gets messed up, there isn't even going to be anybody to call. Bad enough you call somebody now, and you get somebody in a foreign country that you can barely communicate with. Wait till it's a machine. Like I say, I'm going to wrap this up. This was episode 1. Episode 2 will discuss the bare bones of part 2, and and I somehow got cut off. Anyways, so yeah, we're wrapping this up. If you haven't already, please subscribe. That way you won't miss anything. Episode 2 coming up. We discuss part 2 of the mission statement. See you then.